Welcome to this introduction from Evolution Mentoring and a perspective of the 4 archetypes of modern manhood. When I was growing up in the Midwest, it made explicitly clear what it was to be a man and especially what kind of man to be. And the tradition that I come out of, we were all taught to aim and aspire to be a mensch, a man of moral integrity, noble character, genuine dignity. Other cultures had different ways of saying it: a stand-up guy, a man of honor, a great man. It was the person who was always a great sport, who was always there to give you that helping hand when you need it, or the kind of man who you just knew if you shook hands and made an agreement that his word was as good as gold. We had these larger cultural images of these great men through history that simply by looking at their face, we all recognized the nobility in them, the courage it took to make the difficult choices that they made that allowed them to go on and become these kind of men who helped change the world. But there was also these quieter type of men who were also great men, who just by going about their life and doing their thing day to day, in their own way, were making the world a better place. Many of us had sports heroes. This was one of mine when I was growing up. His name was Walter Payton. And while he'll always be known as one of the great football players of all time, more than anything what he's known for was the man he was when he was off the field, the kind of teammate that he was, the citizen he was, the man who contributed to his community. In fact, he was known as such an incredible and extraordinary man that after he died, the NFL named an award called the Man of the Year Award. Not the most valuable player, not who was the athlete who scored the most points, but who was the best man. I also, for myself, and like many of my peers, had a close relationship with my grandparents, especially my grandfathers, both of whom were self-made men who put themselves through school and built substantial lives and businesses and practices for themselves based on doing hard work with an honor code and an integrity to it that was taught to me repeatedly throughout my childhood. Well, you contrast that with what we see more and more of now, these faces and images and stories that have become the caricature of modern man, the kind of thing where we see it and we go, up, just another guy. So Evolution Mentoring is seeking to offer conversations and experiences that grow boys into men. And what I want to be doing is laying out for you what I'm going to call the 4 archetypes of modern man. But before I do that, what I want to talk about is how traditionally throughout history there was a sequence, a journey that a boy would go on into manhood. And the journey would go something like this. You were a boy, and then you became a young man, and then you were a man, and then you were an elder. And you notice in there that there's no adolescent, no rebellious teenager, because societies throughout history always made it a point to bring about a ritual rite of passage, an initiatory experience that would happen just at that moment in a young boy's life when he was on the verge of going one way or the other, and ensuring that he skipped all that and became a young man. Well, these ritual rites of passages, some of them still exist in the world to this day, but they're just documentaries on the Discovery Channel, or they're really, a caricature of what they once were. In so many traditions, it's just a party, but it doesn't really transition you into manhood. The thing is when these rituals and rites of passages were done, is the boy became a young man, and he was on this one-way trajectory towards becoming a full-fledged man and ultimately becoming an elder in society. Many of the great traditions had some kind of sequence like this, whether it was the Buddhist tradition where you were a novice and then you became a monk and then one day became a teacher, or out of the legends of the knighthood of becoming a page. First you were a page, and then you became a squire, and then you became a knight. The modern scouting movement still has this today, Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts to becoming an Eagle Scout, and ultimately when you become an Eagle Scout, being not just honored for what you've accomplished, but also set with a sense of obligation and responsibility to share what it is that you've learned and to contribute to the world to make it a better place. So this is what I think is the symbol of modern manhood now. And it's a show that it's become one of the most popular shows in America. And I will have to tell you that I think I was probably the only person who watched the show and didn't get that the half man wasn't Charlie Sheen. I would actually call this show a man, a guy, and a boy. So in the 4 archetypes that I'm going to talk about of modern manhood, you have a boy, you have bros, and you have guys. And we're going to start with those 3. So what is a boy? The first archetype of modern manhood is a boy. Boys value fun, play, and simplicity. They don't want to get involved in complicated things. They don't want to have to worry about too many things. And boys can grow up and, in essence, remain boys their entire life. And these are the kind of adult males that we encounter where, let's say, they get married. Their wives usually are the ones who, that expression about wear the pants in the family, will oftentimes complain about how whenever there's hard work to be done or the kids get in trouble, this will be the dad who will just kind of shrug his shoulders and say, go talk to your mom about it, or, what's the big deal? They're the grown-up boys who are the ones who like to just go out and play golf and tell a few jokes and have a fun time. They don't drink much. They're not rowdy people. They're really, really likable people. But what happens is when their kids grow up and become teenagers, they begin to look at their father and they lack respect for him because they say, my father's not really a man. He's just a boy. The next of the 4 archetypes is bros. This used to be dudes, but in the last decade or so, they've adopted the name bros. And, of course, we recognize bros probably most typically from the fraternity life, fraternity brothers, and you think of them. But bros, let's talk about what they value. The primary question is, what's in it for me? They have an expression which says bros before hoes because they think of girls and women as objects to be used for pleasure, not as someone to open your soul to and to love. There's an expression that they have, you're not an alcoholic until you graduate. So obviously the activities that they love most are partying, getting with as many girls as they can, watching ESPN SportsCenter, doing their fantasy football, going to the gym and working out. They call each other bro or dude. They tend to live life at a very fast pace. They don't take anything too seriously. And this is one of the key things about bros is that they're highly exclusive. Bros don't stand in isolation. They stand together with their male friends, and they're very exclusive. So obviously when you go to the college and university life and you see them identifying by the Greek letters on their sweatshirts and the house they live in, there's that kind of exclusivity. But even in more and more high schools in America, we're seeing these bands of boys coming together and forming these brotherhoods where oftentimes the adults don't even know that they're doing it, but there's this very exclusive cliquey thing that they're doing about being one of us or not being one of us. When you think of bros, there's also these images that come together of the boys hanging out on the streets together at night, the fraternity life, which I spoke of, gang affiliation, and oftentimes it has a very negative connotation, but a lot of these times these boys who get together and call themselves bros are not really these negative, angry people. It's just that they're seeking to have this kind of identity that has a camaraderie to it. And here's one of the things that I've really discovered about a lot of these boys who go into this bro stage and stay in it for a long time is that ultimately it seems the thing they're really seeking is real true male camaraderie and real true male friendship. They just don't know how to do it in any way other than through sarcasm and a lot of teasing and competition and bonding together about us against girls and that kind of thing. Next archetype, guy. So I used the image of George Clooney not just because I think the character that he played in Up in the Air and in Ocean's 11 is just representative of a typical guy. But if you look at George Clooney's life and his I'll never get married attitude and that kind of stuff, he's such a guy in that regard. So let's talk about some of the things about guys. For a guy, the world is really all about themselves. It's all about me. Never a surprise to see a guy who's got 3 different girls he's going out with, or one in every city that he goes to visit, and you hear that and you go, typical guy. Very often guys have a real issue, a real fear about commitment. They don't want to get married, or if they do get married, they tend not to get married until their late 30s or even early 40s when they've kind of worked this whole thing out of their system. I'm also never surprised to find out when somebody who's a guy does get married that they wind up cheating in their relationship because they're unable to make and sustain an intimate, long-term commitment in a relationship. Guys love their toys and their fast cars, spend their money on that kind of stuff. And very often, a woman who marries a guy will make a comment about how, he just wants to come home and sit on the couch and, he won't get off the couch to go change the diaper because that's, my job to do. He's such a guy. We use that kind of expression of him. You think of guys, we tend to think also of bad guys. I mean, there's always been throughout history, through the movies, there's been, the bad guy. But there's also the ones who are just these kind of out-of-control guys in real life, like this image that you see here of Mike Tyson biting an ear off. And there's also the kind of caricature of the sort of lovable kind of guy, like the character that Hugh Grant seems to play in every single movie, where he's just not quite grown up. Not a bad guy, but he just hasn't quite grown up, and he can't ever quite get across that threshold of making commitment and really, falling in love and getting married. There's also the image of the people who we really thought were men, only to find out that, like all these others, he was really just a typical guy. Lastly, there's the caricature of the nice guy. And the thing about the nice guy, we always say nice guys finish last, is that they're likable, oftentimes even lovable, but no one really takes them that seriously as the kind of person who anyone's going to really listen to or who's going to go out there and really change the world. But they're nice guys. They just haven't fully crossed that threshold into becoming a man. So years ago, somebody said to me, Jeff, you talk about this idea of being a man, but how do you define it? And I thought about it for a minute. I thought it was a great question, a very fair question. And I said, I don't know how I define what it means to be a man. All I know is when I'm in the presence of one. Well, since then, I've thought a great deal about it. And these are the things that I've come up with that I think really delineate when a person has crossed a threshold. They're no longer a boy. They're no longer a bro. They're no longer a guy. But they've really made the commitment and the transition to being a man. What happens is they get to a stage in life where they will make and keep commitments. They'll treat others with respect, everybody with respect. They're accountable for their actions, meaning they don't move through their life like victims and complaining about things that go on, because they're accountable for their actions and the consequences that they create. They take their responsibilities seriously and become people who you can rely on, because they will take their responsibilities seriously. When they make decisions, they consider the well-being of others in their choices, whether it's the well-being of their immediate family, their business, their community, and in the largest sense, they'll take into consideration the well-being of the world when they make their choices. And ultimately, one of the biggest delineations when somebody becomes a man is that they realize that the world doesn't revolve around them. They have a humility and a respect for how big life is and how fragile life is. And they realize that while the world doesn't revolve around them, the future of the world depends on them. And they act with the kind of integrity towards ensuring that whatever they do with their life will be something which will leave the world a better place than it was when they came into it. See, the journey of a man ultimately is to grow into that elder who will one day take the next generation by the hand and be able to guide them and teach them, give them the benefit of their years of experience, and help grow them into people who can take stewardship for the world. Unfortunately, in the modern world, we have less and less of that. And what we've gotten over the last 15, 20 years is a decline in the performance of boys in school, an increase in boys in drug use, mental health issues, and many books have been written describing the concerns about what's going on with the modern male. There was an article that was published in the Wall Street Journal this past year. It said, "Where have the good men gone?" The article was viewed by millions of people. And in it, the author, who was a woman, says, "I'm so tired of dating guys who are more like the boys I used to babysit than the men who drove me home." Well, I personally am so fed up with reading about all the negative statements about boys in our society and how men are failing them and we're not taking care of them and raising them. And along the way in my professional career, I've met a number other of really great men who have made a decision that they're not going to stand back and just let the world go to hell in a handbasket. And what I'm finding is more and more of these good men are fighting back, taking a stance and offering their services and offering their time and making serious contributions to try to address the issues of boys, to help ensure that they don't get stuck in this archetypal stage of going from boy to just becoming a bro to becoming a guy and living the rest of their life as a guy. Helping ensure that they go from boy to becoming a young man, or if they're a guy, to help them get across that threshold and become a man. In evolution mentoring, my own services, what I'm offering is two different programs. One is a high school boys group where I offer a very, very powerful and provocative way of working with teenage boys. And if you're at all familiar with the men's movement, especially the post-Robert Bly men's movement, this is not a group where boys are going to get together and cry and talk about their grief and feelings about their own fathers. This is a very provocative, challenging, high-energy program where I engage these boys in these meaningful conversations around critical ideas and really have them explore some of the larger ethical concerns about how their actions affect the world and what kind of man that they want to be. The other program that I offer is called Boys to Mensch, which is designed to teach Jewish values. And while it's not a program solely for Jewish kids, parents have to realize that the values that are being taught are the ones that come out of Judaism. The biggest expression of that program is actually going to be coming up in Maine in the summer of 2012, where we're going to be launching a program that's going to be part of a year-long mentoring program for boys who want to go through that. If you're interested in learning about the high school boys group, just visit my website and you can learn more about it. See, ultimately, as I see it, the responsibility of us men is to help boys grow into these young men who can enter into the world and contribute and get taken seriously and gain respect and contribute their gifts in the workplace and in the community at large, can make a commitment and enter into the commitment of an intimate relationship and grow a family, and who can one day grow into these people who will look out at the ills of society and take action to ensure that righteousness is served, that justice is served, and that in their own way they're ensuring that they make the world a better place. See, eventually a boy grows into a man whose job it is to do what I'm trying to do in my own way, and what these other good men I'm speaking about are doing in their own way, which is to try to take the younger generation by the hand and help guide them into a responsible, ethical manhood that empowers them to grow into the kind of people and the men that our world desperately needs. You can learn more about my programs at evolutionmentoring.com. I hope you have found this to be useful, and if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area and want your son to participate in the high school boys mentoring program, go to the website right away and you can sign up, and I will look forward to offering every gift that I possibly can and working with you to fulfill the dreams you have to grow your sons into the most amazing men they can become. Thank you very much.